Hello everybody, my name is Silver Sphinx and you're here learning Linux with me. Just a few housekeeping things to get started. This is a bi-weekly stream, the second Friday. We'll try and do this every day at 8 o'clock. 8 to 10 is what we're shooting for, but it may be a little more, a little less, and yes, there will be breaks. There's a show notes URL that's pastebin.com/u/the same username here, Silver Sphinx. There's also a YouTube upload posted there. Today we're going to cover why Linux, why use it, what's free about it, what's not, what to do with it, the little bit of history of both Linux itself and the distro that we're going to be using, which is Ubuntu. We're going to do some breaks. We're going to talk about setting up the VM, installing Ubuntu, a discussion of quite a few things, and then some Q&A time. So let's get started. Why Linux? Well, first of all, it's fast. You can do more with less. I've seen a Pentium 2 box do a PHP site that was limited by bandwidth up until about the maximum amount of bandwidth you could get on a home connection. Number two, it's super light as far as full desktop. With TinyCore, you can do it in 12 megabytes of disk space. TinyCore system requirements are 50 megabytes of RAM and a 486 with a math processor. Number two is it's powerful. 95% of the 500 fastest supercomputers in the world run Linux, including the top 44. 90% of the animation studios use it for rendering. Think everything from Pixar to Avatar. Seriously. There's command line tools in Linux that don't let you do anything else anywhere with such a small install. Most of them come as base and then a few add-ons, and you've got some of the same functionality as Excel and Windows. There's portability. Linux runs on tablets, on your phones, embedded systems like HVAC, desktops, all of that across several architectures. We're talking x86, x86-64, ARM, and SPARC. Probably the best one, though, is that it's free. And when I say it's free as in beer. If you have the machine, if you have the disk to burn it on, if you are willing to do the legwork, it's absolutely 100% free to you. Let's dive a little bit into the history of what Linux is and where it came from, the whole nine yards. Linux was a university project by a Finnish student named Linus Torvalds. It was first released in 1991 in October. Slackware was the first ready-to-use distribution. It was based on SLS, or Soft Landing Linux. It was released in 93, and then it kind of got corporate-y around 1994. If you're really interested in a large amount of Linux backstory, there are tons and tons and tons of write-ups about it. Oh, let's see. Oh, did I mention that it's free? There's no music on this stream because I don't have any Creative Commons license stuff, so if you would like some music, go ahead and turn it on for yourself. Oh, let's see. Richard Stallman was really influential in Linux after the kernel was basically written as a result of GNU not having a kernel to run on. It had some nifty tools run, but no kernel. At a certain point in time in the early years of Linux, GNU and Linux kind of combined, and then we got the tools of GNU on top of the Linux kernel, allowing you to access the underside of your machine, basically the bare metal hardware. Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about Ubuntu, and I'm sure most people have heard of it. It's a fork off of Debian, and it was originally done to bring a desktop to everyone that is free, but also because Debian has an incredibly slow release cycle. It first came out in October of 2004. It aims to be ready to run on the desktop, and it uses Unity. I mean, literally, the DVD installer for Ubuntu, you can drop in a CD-ROM tray, boot the sucker, and run Ubuntu right there, never install anything. It's a live CD. Some of the iffy parts about Ubuntu is that the software is free, but they offer for-profit tech support. The nice part about it is that the governing body for the software is independent from the company. Ubuntu has several variants. There's a desktop, which we won't be using, server, which we're not installing either. We're going to shoot for the Mini. The desktop is just what it says. It's a ready-to-run desktop. Some of you may run it. The server has no GUI front end. It doesn't do anything but terminal and command line. And then Mini starts out with the bare bones basics. It has a shell and the kernel and a few other things installed, but that's the long and the short of it, and that's where we'll start in this series. Something else that's kind of special about Ubuntu is that it introduces LTS. Every fourth desktop and server release is an LTS, meaning that it has a 2-year supported lifetime, for both updates and security patches, and there's a guaranteed upgrade path. So we're going to get started now. Hopefully you've read the show notes in advance, have downloaded VMware and a player, and have installed it from base. If you'll give me just a second, I'm going to go live onto my desktop and start VMware in VM Player. Okay, here's what you should see in front of you. You should be able to create a new virtual machine is where we're going to start. So you'll click on it. And you'll need to find the installer disk, which is the mini ISO that you've installed. I'm going to browse to it. I've got it on my desktop. You're going to get this warning here that says that you could not detect the operating system on the disk image. That's because the mini ISO installs over the internet. There's basically nothing but a start boot and then go. So it'll download all the packages on the fly. This is what you should have if you have the 64-bit version, the mini. I'm going to give this Learning Linux. This is not the host name of your box. You can set your maximum disk size here, and I would say that you should split it into multiple files, especially if you're running something older than Windows 7. That way, if you hit if you get those big files, it can quickly access them instead of having one huge one. Here's a quick overview, and we're going to move forward with the finish. It takes a minute. Okay, when you get here, you should be able to just start the virtual machine. And go ahead and let it boot. Okay, at this screen we're going to want to select command line install. It'll capture your mouse, so it's Control Alt to release it. You want to select command line install with the down arrow and then hit enter to start it. So English, most of us will probably be in the United States. We don't want to detect the keyboard layout because it asks a bunch of questions over and over, a bunch of questions about what keys you have on your keyboard. If you have something that's non-standard, you might let it try to detect your layout. Here you want to select English US, and there are a lot of English in here. South Africa, Nigerian, Guyana, and Cameroon. Just take the default US, and then there's several variants in here as well. If you know that you're using like Colmac or Dvorak, use one of these. We're going to get that quick loading bar. And here it's going through to auto-configure your IP stuff. So you'll get IPv4s. Hopefully you're on a DHCP network. You'll see that screen if it succeeds. And then we'll give it a host name. Linux responds badly to spaces in your host name, so I've used an underscore. That's new. Apparently it doesn't like underscores either. Just give it all one word. It'll be alright. Here it's going to ask you for an archive mirror country. This is kind of important because this is how quickly you'll get your downloads, your updates, all of that stuff. So you'll want to stay pretty close. I believe United States by default, yeah, is just the archive at ubuntu.com. If you have an HTTP proxy, put it here. I do not, so I'm going to leave it blank. It's pretty self-explanatory on how to go through that. And then we've got a nice long loading bar, possibly. So this is actually going out to the net and grabbing all of the packages that you see at the bottom. So this is where the user account will be created. You can actually give your full name if you'd like. I have a tendency to lie. This is the actual username that you'll use to log into the box. One goes in to tell people how to contact you, and this harkens back to when Linux was used on servers that hosted shells for many people. Then you'll select a password. I'm going to select something pretty simple. This can be as simple as complex as you want, but warning, if you go under 4 or 5 characters, it will bark at you about being not a very safe password. Enter it again. Oh. Here's that bark that I was talking about. It says, do you want to use your weak password? If you do, tell it yes. This one's important. You don't want to encrypt your home directory. If keys are lost, things get shuffled, you'll have issues. So tell it no. Here it's going to run through NTP setup, which basically sets the time on your box. It's also going to guess about where your time zone is. It's pretty good in my experience, and I stick with the default here. Okay, partitioning. In this part, we're going to use the entire disk, but you don't have to. If you're installing this on a system and you'd like to break it up, you can do that with the manual mode. LVM will let you concatenate drives together or turn a bunch of small drives into one large one. It's kind of nifty if you're on a system that you know you can expand, but I don't ever plan on expanding this one because it's in a VM. In this one, you should select the defaults because you are in a VM. Here it's going to ask you to write the changes to disk. You'll notice that it created an ext4 and a swap partition. The swap in Linux is like virtual memory or the cache files that are used by Windows. This loading bar is one of the longer ones because it's actually going out to grab all of the information off the net. If you've reached this part and you're waiting for these loading things, now's a perfect time for Q&A. So if you have them, go ahead and shoot them into the chat. There's a question asked in chat about why I'm doing these. Honestly, it boils down to I think that information should be free. And what better way to do that than with a free operating system? More people that know this stuff, not only is it useful in your day-to-day life if you'd like to make the full switch to Linux onto a free system, it's also very good to put on a resume. There are lots and lots of positions out there that allow you just basic sysadmin as well as networking stuff that this would encompass. You do this on a regular basis. There's Linux Plus, and Novell offers a type of certification with Linux. It was asked in chat about certifications. There are actually 3 stages, and I think it's the LIPC 1, 2, and 3. In essence, they're sysop um, stages. In the beginning, the first one will cover part of the material that's in the first one through these series of videos. The second and third ones get more and more advanced, all the way up to basically being able to run and manage a database on a Linux server. I also just noticed the box at the bottom asking about VMware tools. You can't install the VMware tools until you actually have an operating system installed. They might come in to let you closer interact with like your graphics card and some of your NIC things. As for right now, we're going to tell it to remind me later, and it should remind me on next boot. Had someone in the chat ask about building Arch. We can try it. It's not a distro that I've done more than a couple times, and I know that it's fairly involved. If you are interested in Arch, Arch Wiki on Google will get you to their site. There's a great how to build at the very beginning. There's a beginner's guide on how to build and set up everything, and it literally has you configure everything from the very beginning, including manual formatting. There was a question asked about building an install disk or a diagnostic disk in essence. There's a lot of rescue CDs if you look for them. A lot of them are GUI driven, but there's also a few that are just straight up command line and you have to know what you need in order to move forward. We might get into some of that as far as recovery, what those discs look like, how that goes. It all kind of depends on you guys. I have a list of things that I'd like to cover, but who knows? At the end of that, maybe we can go on to suggestions. Ta-da, we installed. So, now it's asking us about updates. Unlike Windows, it Linux doesn't usually nag you about updates. It'll warn you when you first log into the terminal, but other than that, it'll never do it for you. It'll never ask you to postpone them. It's just up to you to make them happen. I recommend in this one that you install security updates automatically because those, if the machine is running in a production environment, will come on, go in, but they should never take down a live working box. When you get to here, this is about the bootloader, and this will actually load you into the operating system. As it says, this is the only operating system on this computer, and it's a new install, and that's because we're running in VMware. If you tell it no, it'll expect something else to take over, so in this instance, say yes. And this is going to ask you to set the clock to UTC. We We set the locale, which is the part of the operating system that basically holds what your keyboard layout is, what your language is, and what your time zone is. If you don't set this to UTC, you can get clock that's off by as much as you are away from UTC. So I would recommend here. It's also good if you're going to develop code because sometimes that stuff can be important. Okay, here we are done. Just when you get here, go ahead and tell it continue. It'll pop out, and you want to make sure that it removes the CD. So I'm going to disconnect it. And here we are with a brand new Linux login.